Deep in the jungles of Central America, there are silent stone cities wrapped in vines and mystery. For centuries, the story of the ancient Maya has been one of history's greatest enigmas. We've been told this compelling, almost ghost-like, story of a brilliant civilization that, at the very height of its power, simply vanished, swallowed by the jungle without a trace. But what if that story, the one we all know, is wrong? What if the Maya never really vanished at all? For decades, the leading theory was that a thriving civilization just disappeared. But incredible new discoveries dug from the Earth and beamed down from space are finally revealing the truth. And it's far more complex, far more dramatic, and so much more human than we ever imagined. The clues have been there all along, hiding in the stones, in the soil, and even in the DNA of their descendants. Today, we're piecing them together to show you what really happened to the ancient Maya. First, let's just tear down the biggest myth of all, the idea that the Maya people disappeared. It's the most misleading part of the whole story. The simple truth is the Maya are still here. Millions of people who identify as Maya are alive and well today in their ancestral homelands across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They're speaking Mayan languages and carrying on traditions that stretch back for millennia. So, if the people didn't vanish, what did? What actually collapsed wasn't the people, but their political system. The Great Collapse that everyone talks about refers to something specific, the Terminal Classic period, mostly between the 8th and 9th centuries AD. During this time, the massive city-states in the southern lowlands, places like Tikal and Palenque, went into a steep decline. Royal dynasties that had ruled for centuries crumbled, the grand tradition of carving stone monuments stopped, and one by one, the cities were abandoned, left for the jungle to take back. It was an urban desertion, not an extinction event. A powerful recent genetic study hammered this point home, showing a direct genetic line from the ancient inhabitants of cities like Copan to modern Maya populations. The people adapted, they migrated, they transformed, they didn't disappear. So, the real mystery isn't where did the Maya go, but what on earth was powerful enough to bring their mighty kingdom of cities crashing down? To really get the scale of this collapse, you have to understand the staggering heights these cities fell from. The classic Maya period, from around 250 to 900 AD, was a golden age. This wasn't some primitive culture, this was a civilization that rivaled any on Earth at the time. They built sprawling cities with breathtaking architecture, their pyramids serving as temples and tombs for divine kings. Their cities were even connected by incredible elevated highways, called sakbi, that cut straight through the jungle for miles. Their brains were just as impressive. The Maya developed the most sophisticated writing system in the pre-Columbian Americas. They were master astronomers, tracking the heavens with stunning accuracy, and their calendars were more precise than the ones used in Europe. They even independently developed the concept of zero, a revolutionary mathematical idea. For a long time, we pictured small temple clusters in an endless jungle, but a technology called LiDAR has completely shattered that image. By using lasers to map the ground beneath the trees, archaeologists have digitally peeled back the jungle, and what they've found is mind-blowing. These scans have revealed thousands of unknown structures, houses, defensive walls, canals, and huge terraced farms. Some estimates now put the peak Maya population as high as 16 million people. This wasn't a civilization hiding in the jungle. This civilization was the jungle. They had transformed their entire environment. was a world on the brink of something, a society so complex, it seemed destined to last forever. So how did it all go so wrong? The end didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, creeping death that took more than a century. Starting in the late 700s, the lifeblood of the southern Maya lowlands just began to drain away. The warning signs are written in stone, or rather, the lack of it. For centuries, Maya kings had carved huge monuments, or stelae, marking their victories with dates from their calendar. But then, the carving just stopped. Palenquest's last dated monument was in 799 AD. At Calakmul, the silence began after 810 AD. Tikal, one of the giants, carved its final stela in 869 AD. This tells us the very foundation of Maya society, the institution of divine kingship, was crumbling. The kings were losing their authority, and as their power faded, their cities emptied out. Palaces were left vacant, temples fell into disrepair, and the jungle began to creep back in. This wasn't happening everywhere at once. While the southern cities were collapsing, some in the north, like Chichen Itza, actually thrived for a while. But in the Maya heartland, it was a catastrophe. Dynasties that had ruled for generations vanished, great cities became ghost towns. The question that has haunted historians for over a century is why there was no single smoking gun. Instead, a perfect storm of crises was brewing, ready to bring the Maya world to its knees. The old image of the Maya as peaceful stargazers that's been completely overturned. The truth is, the Maya world was full of conflict. The southern lowlands were a patchwork of competing city-states, each led by a divine king who was constantly vying for power, land, and prestige. Right before the collapse began, the evidence for warfare gets much more intense. Inscriptions on monuments brag about military victories and the sacrifice of rival kings. We see hastily built defensive walls, a clear sign of a world living in fear. The nature of the fighting also seems to get uglier. Earlier wars might have been more ritualistic, but by the terminal classic period, the fighting became about total destruction, wiping rival cities right off the map. This created a deadly feedback loop with the droughts. As resources grew scarce, competition for the best land and water sources would have exploded into war. War disrupted farming, which made the shortages even worse. A king's power came from his ability to bring prosperity and rain. When the rains failed and the wars raged, people lost faith in their leaders. Trade networks collapsed. The central authority needed to maintain the infrastructure fell apart. It was a vicious cycle. Drought fueled war, war fueled political chaos, and the chaos made it impossible to deal with the drought. The Maya kingdoms weren't just fighting the climate, they were tearing each other apart. For decades, scholars argued over the cause. Was it disease, invasion? But recently, one theory has gained a mountain of evidence thanks to some incredible scientific detective work: climate change in the form of extreme, long-lasting droughts. To find the proof, scientists went into the caves of the Yucatan Peninsula, places the Maya saw as sacred gateways to the underworld. Inside, rock formations called stalagmites hold the secrets. Like tree rings, stalagmites grow in layers, and their chemical makeup is a precise record of past rainfall. By analyzing them, scientists have reconstructed the ancient climate with shocking detail. What they found is chilling. Their analysis shows that the collapse of the cities happened at the exact same time as a series of severe, multi-year droughts. These weren't just a few dry years. A recent study of a stalagmite from Grutas Tzibna cave in Mexico provided startling clarity. It identified 8 severe droughts between 871 and 1021 AD, each lasting 3 years or more. And most devastating of all, they found one catastrophic drought that lasted for an astonishing 13 consecutive years, from roughly 929 to 942 AD. For a civilization that depended on a water-hungry crop like maize, a drought like that would have been apocalyptic. It meant crop failure, famine, and a desperate lack of drinking water. Their brilliant water management systems would have been pushed past the breaking point. The evidence from the caves is undeniable. As the rains fail, the foundations of Maya society crumble. The drought evidence is so powerful that for a while, it felt like case closed. But the picture is more complex. While drought was a huge catalyst, it wasn't the whole story. The reality is the climate crisis didn't hit every part of the Maya world in the same way. Some recent research has challenged the idea of a simple, universal collapse. For instance, one study pointed out that the Maya had access to nearly 500 different edible plants, many of which are highly resistant to drought. This suggests that while their main food source, maize, would have failed, widespread starvation might not have been inevitable. We also see that different cities responded in different ways. The great city of Chichen Itza in the north, for example, seemed to weather the droughts longer than others. This could be because it had access to massive natural sinkholes called cenotes for water. Or maybe its powerful trade networks allowed it to import food. This shows us that human choices and politics played a massive role. It wasn't just about the rain. It was about how societies were organized and how they chose to respond. So, the drought wasn't a simple knockout blow. It was a massive stress test that exposed and magnified all the cracks that were already forming in Maya society. It was the spark that lit the fuse on conflict and political breakdown. The Maya weren't just victims of their environment. They were actively shaping it, and their own success may have helped sow the seeds of their downfall. To support millions of people, they cleared huge areas of forest for farms and cities. They needed a massive amount of wood to cook food and, crucially, to create the lime plaster that covered their amazing temples. It's estimated that it took 20 trees to produce just a single square meter of plaster. This widespread deforestation had serious side effects. Computer simulations show that clearing that much forest would have made the droughts even worse. Trees help generate rainfall through a process called transpiration. By cutting them down, the Maya may have accidentally reduced local rainfall by as much as 15%, making a bad situation even worse. Without the forest, soil erosion would have skyrocketed, washing away precious farmland and silting up the reservoirs they depended on. The Maya were brilliant engineers, but they were pushing their fragile tropical ecosystem to its absolute limit. It's a tragic picture of a civilization caught in an environmental trap of its own making. The collapse wasn't just a natural disaster. It was the result of a society that had possibly grown beyond what its environment could sustain. Just when you think the story can't get any wilder, new technology has thrown in another twist. For decades, the jungle canopy hid most of the Maya world from us. But that's all changed with LiDAR. This revolutionary technology lets archaeologists digitally deforest the landscape and see the full, staggering extent of Maya civilization for the first time. And the results are breathtaking. Massive LiDAR surveys have uncovered hundreds of thousands of previously unknown structures. What we thought were isolated cities are actually part of a vast, interconnected network of settlements that covered the entire region. In a discovery announced in late 2024, a PhD student accidentally found a massive, previously unknown city by analyzing old environmental data. Named Valeriana, it had huge pyramids and plazas and may have been home to 50,000 people at its peak. These discoveries prove the Maya were far more numerous and complex than we ever dreamed. But they also add nuance to the collapse. They show that while the South failed, the Maya story is also one of resilience. People move. LiDAR has helped identify strongholds like Sacbalam, founded by Maya who resisted the Spanish conquest deep into the 17th century, hundreds of years after the classic collapse. And resistance continued until the very last independent Maya kingdom, based at the island city of Najpitan, was finally conquered by the Spanish in 1697. The Maya didn't just give up, they adapted, migrated, and fought to survive for centuries. LiDAR proves that there are still countless secrets hidden under the jungle just waiting to be found. So, what really happened to the great Maya civilization? There is no single answer. The collapse wasn't one event, but a perfect storm of disasters that fed into each other. It was a cascading systems failure that played out over a century. It began with a devastating climate crisis. Severe droughts crippled their agriculture and water supplies. This environmental pressure then ignited the flames of war. Escalating conflict over scarce resources shattered the political order and made any coordinated response impossible. All of this was made worse by long-term environmental degradation. Widespread deforestation, done to feed a massive population, likely made the droughts even worse. Faced with climate change, endless war, and a failing political system, the people did the only logical thing: they left. They abandoned the dying southern cities, moving to new areas, reorganizing their societies, and adapting. The collapse wasn't a mystery. It was a deeply human response to a series of catastrophic challenges. The story of the Maya is a powerful cautionary tale about how even the most brilliant civilizations are vulnerable to climate change and political infighting. But it is also a story of incredible resilience. The Maya people did not vanish. Their descendants are a living testament to a culture that was not erased but forced to transform. And as we continue to uncover their secrets, they teach us profound lessons about the rise and fall of nations and the enduring strength of the human spirit. This wave of discovery is changing what we know about the Maya almost daily. It's a giant puzzle, and every new piece makes the picture clearer, yet more complex. This story isn't over. What do you think was the final nail in the coffin? For the great city-states, let us know your theory in the comments. And if you want to explore more of history's greatest mysteries with us, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell.